RFK announces a September surprise. Measles spreads across North America, and the CDC can't help on lead poisoning. This is America Dissected. I'm your host, Dr. Abdul
And I'm your co-host, Dr. Katelyn Jetelina.
And we're recording this on Monday, April 14th at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. All right, Katelyn, let's begin with a bit of a whopper of a statement. It's getting a ton of attention, as it should. And no surprise, it came from, bing, 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 RFK Jr. Here's the clip.
By September, we will know what has caused the autism epidemic, and we'll be able to eliminate those exposures. We've launched a massive testing and research effort that's going to involve hundreds of scientists from around the world.
And just in case that wasn't clear, he said, and I quote, by September, we will know what has caused the autism epidemic, and we will be able to eliminate those exposures. Katelyn, need I ask, how outrageous is this promise on a scale from 1 to 10?
It's pretty darn outrageous. You know, I know supporters that are saying that moonshots are ambitious. We need more of them in this day and age. And look, you know, I agree. I think we can accomplish a lot if we put our minds to it. Take the COVID vaccine. But this just doesn't seem like a genuine moonshot initiative. And RFK has yet to earn our trust that it is one. His track record is to elevate crappy science. And that is very likely what he's going to do in this moment. I think that if we're building on past work, it's really unclear what's new or what's different. If he's starting from scratch, it's simply just not possible to deliver meaningful results in a few months. And if we are pushing for quick answers over valued, careful science, we're going to end up with poorly designed studies. We're going to mine existing data sets for sketchy correlations, and it just won't hold up to scrutiny. You know, and I think the thing that also just irks me with this is that there's this insinuation that nothing's been done around autism. And in reality, RFK Jr.'s center, right, National Institutes of Health, invested over $300 million last year in autism research. So I don't know. I mean, I think that we'll see what happens, but I would say, Abdul, we can safely assume September's going to be a messaging shit show for all of us in public health. And a lot of us right now with this announcement are trying to figure out, like, what do we do right now, right? Like, how do we prepare? Abdul, what are your thoughts in this space?
Yeah, so that last part, let me just review the logic here. We're going to gut 20% of the NIH, and then we're going to use it to figure out what causes autism, as if nobody's been trying to figure out this question exactly. Until RFK discovered and he ordered that they're going to do it. I mean, this is some like authoritarian strongman bullshit. Like, you know, the reality of it is that science takes a long time. And the notion that starting in April, you're going to have an answer by September, that to me seems ridiculous. Now, what's critical for us is that we've got to be able to get out ahead and define what science is acceptable in terms of how we think about the causes of autism. And we have to recognize that there is no silver bullet. Had there been a silver bullet, like this is the one singular cause of autism, we'd have known it by now. The problem is that there is no single bullet. These outcomes are extremely complex. They involve some aspect likely of innate biology and genetics, some aspect likely of something about the environment, something about behavior. We don't really know because it's a really hard thing to know. So anybody who tells you that they're going to go searching and they're going to find the silver bullet and we're going to address this epidemic, that's just not realistic to how science works. And the hard part about this is that it forces us to be out there. And I've been saying this for a minute, and I know you've been saying it as well, Katelyn, to be really good messengers of the scientific process, right? The reason we don't have an answer right now isn't because good scientists haven't been looking. It's because science is hard. It takes a lot of time. There are a lot of hypotheses, and complexity is a real thing. And I think we need to be getting ahead of that conversation, educating the public about how to think about science ahead of an announcement. And, you know, I'm grateful that they gave us a heads up that they're going to be announcing the silver bullet that all the rest of us missed in just under 6 months. But I also think it's just critical for us to recognize that this in part sits with us because we just have not been very good messengers about the scientific process and about why some questions are really, really difficult to answer. Now, one of the critical speakers on this, who's emerged as a bit of a public health hero, is Peter Marks, who's back out there again. He was on Face the Nation on Sunday, and he said this.
I'm somebody who in my career as a physician taking care of patients, and there are people probably who are hearing me now who know that I cared for leukemia patients for a significant number of years. Giving people false hope is something you should never do. It is absolutely, you can be incredibly supportive of people, but giving them false hope is wrong. If you just ask me as a scientist, is it possible to get the answer that quickly? I don't see any possible way.
Unless you're buying research from somebody else who's already in the midst of it?
Yes.
I mean,
right.
Is that credible way to come to a conclusion?
He may be aware of a bunch of research that I'm not aware of, and that's why I'm going to be respectful here. You know something? I'd love to hear it presented.
Peter's right here, right? And I think what he's underlying is one, and this is my biggest problem, there's just no transparency, right? Like, what's the plan till September? Who are these scientists? What is the budget? What is the transparency plan after the fact they found their answer? And I think he's getting to this. We just don't know how they're doing this. And that makes it even more sketchy because science is usually a huge, open, transparent box. And it's completely, I mean, it's funded by the taxpayers as it should be.
Yeah, give it up for Peter Marks. I mean, dude is stepped out of his public role, and now he's stepping out into the public and sharing his perspective. And I thought his point about giving people false hope is a really good one. And it centers the folks who are most affected by this, which are families with children and adults caring for adults with autism. And so I just really appreciate his courage in stepping out this way. The other thing I just want to remind everybody, to your point, Katelyn, science is supposed to be transparent. Like the whole point, like when you do science, your job is to open up everything you did so that it can be critiqued by the public, right? And it can be either recreated or done differently. And then we can compare and contrast outcomes and go from there. When you say we're going to have the answer in September, what you're basically telling people is, I have a secret process as, by the way, a director of a public agency, and I'm going to tell you what it says when the time is right. So I think all of us should be demanding, show us your process, show us your science, show us from the jump. Do not communicate anything without communicating how you got there and opening it up for critique from the scientific community. And together we can all assess. Maybe he does have an answer. Maybe like the answer he comes out with is like super credible, and he'll find that it's an extremely complex outcome that has a lot of parts to it. But I'm skeptical. And the worst part of this is he's already got a baked in answer. We already know what it is. Yeah. He's been telling us this for a long, long time, that he believes, based on little to no evidence to demonstrate, that the answer is the MMR vaccine. And we all know that that's just not credible. So, let's move to the other issue that happens when you demonize a safe and effective vaccine like MMR. And that is the fact that, we have a very, very serious measles outbreak. Katelyn, can you give us a status check?
Yeah, I mean, measles keeps growing. It keeps spreading very quickly. In fact, we just passed more than 700 measles cases in the United States. The reason why that's significant is it's the highest number of cases in the past 14 out of 15 years. Another interesting statistic is that now 6 states have more than 10 cases, which is also very highly unusual. So this is not just really in one spot, although this Texas outbreak certainly is taking the cake, over 540 cases. Now, there's a few other developments happening with this Texas panhandle outbreak. One is it's starting to spread in urban areas. Before, it used to just be rural areas. Now, Lubbock is seeing more cases. El Paso is seeing more cases. And this isn't great news to epidemiologists because of population density. The other thing that's happening is this panhandle outbreak is now international, right? So an unvaccinated 8-year-old traveled to Texas from Mexico, returned to Mexico, and now that outbreak is 225 cases and growing incredibly quickly. Oof. And so it's becoming an international outbreak. The other thing that's really interesting right now, and I'm hesitant to bring it up because we don't know a lot of answers, but in the just to bring people along for the ride, one of the Mexico cases was genetically tested. And interestingly, the genetics of that Mexico case that traveled to Texas is also linked to Ontario. This Ontario is also having a massive outbreak, more than 600 cases right now. And so I think we're going to start seeing is this huge outbreak across North America. And how we get that under control is going to require a lot of international cooperation as well as internal cooperation within the United States. And so this outbreak is getting a whole lot more complex. It's getting bigger, and it's getting honestly harder and harder for me to see how we stop this within 12 months and we don't lose the elimination status.
You'd think that instead of, I don't know, passing tariffs that are untargeted and will achieve very little outcome except for trying to tank the global economy, we might want to work with our partners in Canada and Mexico to address this virus.
The other thing, Abdul, I'll be honest, that's on my mind, and I'm actually surprised that this commentary hasn't been picked up by the current administration, is they're trying to figure out a reason to initiate Title 42, which is basically the ability to close borders because of infectious diseases. And if this is connected to Mexico and Canada, I could very easily see them leveraging that. There is a lot of nuance to this, right? Sure. Measles cases are not endemic in the United States. It does come from international travel, but typically it's people that are Americans travel internationally and vaccinated and then come back and seed. I think that's the case in about 90% of international cases in the United States. And so, how we get ahead of that, how we start pre-bunking that is a really big concern of mine right now.
Yeah. And I think it's really important for us to identify what is the fundamental and central driver of these outbreaks in the communities that they've hit is the low level of vaccination because of mis and disinformation. If we had enough vaccination in the community, it would be virtually impossible for this virus to travel because it would not find susceptible hosts. And that's not what's happening because a large proportion of people have fallen prey to the same kind of disinformation that the current HHS secretary has been peddling from his position right now.
Yeah, it's very quite clear. If you want to stop a measles outbreak, you have to get more vaccinations. I mean, it's that contagious where that's just literally the only choice. And how Americans grapple with this level of individualism versus collective good versus mistrust versus everything else, politicization, is going to be incredibly interesting and honestly kind of sad to watch unfold. But we'll see where this takes us. And of course, this outbreak comes amid of restructuring at HHS, right? Where all of these departments are getting slashed, and it's making it harder to respond to all kinds of crises, not just measles, right, Abdul?
Yeah. So let me just explain, as a local public health official, how you use the CDC. When you've got a problem, you'll reach out to them for support. It's either people that come and support you on the ground, or even just technical support. But there was a stunning example of the real life consequences of all of this DOGE cutting just last month. In Milwaukee, Wisconsin, they found evidence of lead in drinking water at the city's public schools. So the officials there asked the CDC to help them with a lead poisoning investigation. And, that used to be a thing that the CDC did, except for the CDC rejected the request because, get this, the team that used to do this literally no longer exists. They literally cut the program. They literally just emailed them back with, I quote, "I sincerely regret to inform you that due to the complete loss of our lead program, we will be unable to support you with this." I mean, I just think about this for a second. The nation's preeminent public health department no longer has a lead poisoning program. And so kids who are affected in their schools cannot get support from their federal government in the richest, most powerful country in the history of the world, because a billionaire came through and cut the program. Now, what's killing me about this, and this is the thing I want everybody to just connect here, they're literally, and we're going to talk about this later, trying to take fluoride out of the water because of an ostensible, less than fully vetted connection between high levels of fluoride and IQ. You know what really affects your IQ, Katelyn? Lead. And unlike fluoride, which protects your teeth, which then protects your brain, lead has no discernible value to the public, none at all. And so they cut the lead program, and now they're pulling fluoride out of the water for the same purposes. I would ask you to make it make sense. It's not possible. So I think we should just move on.
You know what's also interesting about this, Abdul, is that rejection from CDC came after RFK Jr. said that program was cut by mistake and he was going to reinstate it. And I think we talked about this last week, that like, I think that was a smokescreen, and I'm starting to get real signals that it was a smokescreen. You know, I actually chose last week to choose hope that some version of that critical work's going to continue, particularly because lead and environmental toxins is a huge worry among MAHA movement. And maybe it wouldn't be restated at the CDC, maybe it's in the new AHA program, whatever. But yeah, for them, they just flat out denied that. And it's interesting to see how a lot of these changes don't align with all of these political talking points. Maybe it's not surprising, but it is disappointing.
Again, we're doing that thing, Katelyn, where we try to find intellectual coherence. It's not possible. We're trying to make it make sense. We believe that there's an overarching goal here. There's not. It's just chaos and ham-handed execution and RFK liking to hear his own voice. America Dissected is brought to you by the de Beaumont Foundation. For 25 years, the de Beaumont Foundation has worked to create practical solutions that improve the health of communities across the country. The foundation advances policy, builds partnerships, and strengthens systems to give everyone the opportunity to achieve their best possible health. To learn more, visit debeaumont.org. We saw a new report in Wired magazine that explains how cuts to HHS could be putting medical records at risk. Katelyn, can you walk us through what we learned?
Yeah, so this Wired article interviewed 4 current and former health and human service workers, and they basically said that IT and cybersecurity infrastructure at HHS is in danger because HHS cut a bunch of staff at the Office of Chief Information Officer. And that office is responsible for a number of things like renewing contracts, overseeing government contractors. And a lot of these contractors were in charge of keeping our health data systems safe from cyber attacks. You know, the author of this Wired piece actually covers disinformation. And I think he got it right. You know, with all of these cuts this past month, the thing that I've been asking myself is, what is the first thing that's going to fall, right? There's a lot of these infrastructure things that are changing that may have short-term implications, certainly long-term implications. And I've been thinking, like, what is going to be first impacted? And I come down to data updates. They're just not going to be able to update quick enough. 2, states complaining that grants are getting out on time, right? 90% of this office is acquisitions for grants. FOIA, right? Lack of transparency. And then even maybe like this Wired article is saying is privacy breach. There's so much data within HHS. And this destruction is a fantastic time for a hacker or a foreign player to just sweep in and take advantage of the destruction. And I'm concerned of where this is gonna lead, because these are sensitive health records. Clinical trial data, for example, could be at risk of a data breach or cyber hack. And I don't think much good comes out of removing a lot of these positions. What are your thoughts, Abdul?
What's even worse about it is you're not even going to be able to hold them accountable, right? Because a lot of this is about the federal government and its relationship to contractors. And so when the federal government decides it's not wrong about a thing, you don't really have much of a recourse. Like, you can go to the courts, but if their job was to keep data secure on their end and data gets lost and there's another partner there, right? It's not difficult for a lot of these folks to just blame the partner, right? It's the same sort of situation when they gut a lot of the support staff for key contracts and grants, and then you try and get some support, and then all of a sudden you don't get the support, and then you're held accountable for a thing that you didn't know, but for your support staff would have told you. And it's this same sort of program where they say, oh, this is not important because we can't really be held accountable to doing it, right? And I worry that when it comes to this issue, it's sort of the same issue.
Or it's going to come in 4 years, and then guess whose fault it is? It's not their fault. It's someone else's fault. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's the importance of really keeping track of all of this and holding people accountable. But Abdul, in the meantime, RFK is touring the country to rail against fluoride. What's the latest here?
Yeah, I would really love a tour on measles because like that seems to me to be the big issue. You could also throw in some like bird flu there. Like I think that would be also great. But touring on fluoridation, like a thing that was a major public health victory that you want to repeal. It's like literally like it's really that sort of like make America healthy again thing. They're like really trying to take us back in history, except for the missing part of it is that we just weren't as healthy as I think they think we were back then. They want the CDC to stop recommending fluoridation. If a lot of states end up following this recommendation, it may be more than just, a few more kids are going to get cavities. I want you to think about the impacts here, right? There are, first of all, oral health is it's sort of the forgotten sibling of public health and healthcare more generally. We've done a couple of episodes on this, but the trouble with it is that, in medicine, there are doctors that see your whole body except for your mouth, and there are specific doctors for your mouth. So we tend to think about it as different from. And I think that tends to follow in public health, but this is literally the gateway to your whole body. There are reams and reams of studies that demonstrate what the impact of having open, festering cavities, which by the way, are literally like spaces in your teeth where bacteria are growing, on the rest of your health, whether it's cardiovascular disease, or even certain types of cancer. And so that consequence has made it a lot easier for us to ignore the potential implications of doing this. And then the other part of this is that because of the differences in medicine, a lot of people don't carry dental health care, even if they're insured otherwise, which means that the pain of an infection, for example, in your oral cavity may go unaddressed. And that's debilitating for people. So I worry a lot about what the impact of this is going to be. And then think about this. You need infrastructure to care for that many more cavities, right? And I don't know that we're even set up for that. And even if we had the infrastructure, you're talking about people who are going to go without basic access to other needs, whether it's housing or cars or transit or you name it, because now they've got to actually pay to get care for a pressing oral issue that would not have existed because they were drinking fluoride in the water. That's how this works.
Yeah, the impact goes well beyond preventing cavities, especially for our kids, right? Poor dentition is an important source of stigma and shame for children and is a visible sign of poverty. We actually have epidemiological studies that show that kids with poor dentition are more likely to withdraw from social participation, hide their smiles, higher rates of school absenteeism. So there's a huge barrier of a sense of confidence and social belonging that can also have these lifelong effects. I think that the biggest problem with a lot of these MAHA movement solutions like red dye, 40, or fluoride is not thinking about the broader population that people can't afford dental insurance, and they will have to hide their smiles at school too. And that's a real shame. And that's why public health is important. Let's just say that.
Yeah. But we've also heard from the oral health community. Katelyn, do you want to tell us a little bit about where they stand?
Right. So we're hearing from the American Dental Association that they are opposed to huge cuts to oral health. I don't think that's a big surprise, right? The oral health office was cut. The CDC oral health director was also cut. And it's, pretty safe to be opposed to budget cuts, but I think it's far more dangerous, and you can get a big target on your back if you oppose something like fluoride, which is a pet project of RFK Jr. and thus the larger administration. And I think that's why dentists are not largely sounding major alarms for fluoride. Some are, I see on social media, some aren't. I just don't want to be the target of the administration. But the bigger question, Abdul, is what evidence do we have that fluoride is a silent killer?
None. Look, this whole argument is based on a couple of studies that have demonstrated that very high fluoride levels are associated with lower IQ. Like that's what this is about. And look, I value not lowering people's IQ, which is why we probably shouldn't gut the lead program at the CDC, but we already talked about that. But here's the thing about it, right? this is based on like this completely flawed approach to decision making, where it's easier for somebody who wants to demagogue an intervention to point to some side effect and say we should not do this without doing the obvious thing, which is to ask, when we take the consequences of an intervention in totality, is it better or worse to do this? And we end up ignoring the side effect of the thing we're trying to prevent in the first place. So the way this logic applies to MMR is to make up an association between MMR and autism and say, well, we really shouldn't give people MMR vaccines, except for that means we're now ignoring the consequences of measles, which is why we take the MMR vaccine, that and mumps and rubella, right? Applied here, it's saying, oh, well, we've got some evidence, flimsy, right, that demonstrates a relationship between fluoride and IQ, so we should ban fluoride, except for what we're not paying attention to is the consequences long-term of cavities, which, by the way, are not really good for brain development. So there's that, but it is a flawed approach that leaves you biasing the outcome that you say is a side effect of your intervention without thinking big picture about what it is that you're trying to prevent. And this is the game they play over and over and over and over again. But then they couple it with this conspiracy logic that this is all about making somebody out there a whole lot of money. And then lost in all of this is the question of, okay, so what about people who actually suffer the outcome? And it's easy to do this kind of demagoguery, right? Because you can point to a thing without actually having to ask the big picture question. All right. So we had a great conversation to somebody who is speaking truth out there, and that is Dr. Zachary Rubin. Many of you may know him from his viral social media, viral in a good way, social media. He's a double board certified. Yeah, no, he's a huge fan. And also, did you know, Katelyn, that he's like a hula hooping champion?
I have seen that on his Instagram, actually. I did not know he was a champion.
I almost wanted to have a whole conversation about like hula hoops and allergies. I didn't know how to connect those two, but like, anyway, missed opportunity. He's been using his platform to call out RFK Jr. on the threats to public health that he's seeing. And he's an allergist, and like all of us are interested in allergies because either we have them or people we love have them, or we have kids who know people who have them. And he's just been answering these questions about allergies, but he's also been doing this work of educating people about the scientific process and about a lot of these fallacies that we talked about the difficulties of like proving a negative in public health in medicine. So I know that I'm a huge fan, Katelyn.
I'll just say we don't have allergies in San Diego.
Oh, come on, man. It took us this long to get the spring, and now you're going to make fun of us for our spring? I'm out. Okay, look, it was good. I appreciate you, Katelyn. Okay. Why don't you go out and surf, and I'll just take a big nose of pollen while we're at it. Okay. All right. All right, Katelyn. I hope you have a fantastic week. We will chat soon. I will have a stuffy nose, and you will be bronzed. So there's that.
All right. See you next week.
America Dissected is brought to you by Abdul and Branch. I don't know about you, but time always feels too short. And that means I carry too many of my day's worries into bed with me. And the worst part is that it feels like those worries are just heavier as I'm trying to fall asleep, which means that finding comfort in my bed is just more important. Which is why I love Abdul and Branch. Abdul and Branch sheets quiet all that noise, wrapping you in the softness so extraordinary your body and mind effortlessly drift to sleep. Their signature sheets are made with the finest 100% organic cotton, so you can spend every night in the softest feeling imaginable. These best-selling sheets feel buttery, breathable, and get softer with every wash. Discover the difference with Abdul and Branch's 30-night guarantee. I just love how these sheets feel and how much more comfortable I am falling asleep as a result. The quality, it's obvious the minute you unfold them, and they just keep getting better with every single wash. Where old sheets fray and fall apart, these age like George Clooney. Abdul and Branch products are made different, so you can sleep better at night. They're woven with the finest 100% organic cotton on earth and crafted by artisans who earn the pay and respect they deserve. They have designs and colors for every bedroom style and mattress size. And if you don't believe me, you can get 30-night worry-free guarantee. You can try Abdul and Branch sheets for an entire month. There's no catch. You can wash, style, and feel the difference for yourself, risk-free. And if you don't get your best night's sleep, you can send them back for a full refund. Feel the difference an extraordinary night's sleep can make with Abdul and Branch. Get 15% off plus free shipping on your first set of sheets at bullandbranch.com/AD. That's Bull and Branch, BOLLAND, branch.com/AD to save 15% off. Exclusions apply. See site for details. All right. Can you introduce yourself for the tape?
Yeah, my name is Dr. Zachary Rubin. I'm a double board certified pediatric allergist in the western suburbs of Chicago. I'm in private practice, and I'm on social media educating the masses about allergies, infectious diseases, and public health. I'm excited that I'm having a book coming out called All About Allergies, and I want people to know more about allergies because it's one of the most common chronic diseases in the United States and abroad. It's growing at an alarming rate, and we need to take this more seriously.
Well, I really appreciate it. And it actually happens to be the case that we'd like to know all about allergies today. So I want to start there. What is an allergy?
An allergy is simply an abnormal immune response to a foreign substance. That's different than, let's say, rheumatology, which deals with autoimmune diseases. So the immune system is constantly surveilling to see what are the foreign objects out there that could cause harm, cause an infection, like viruses and bacteria. And so we try to protect ourselves from those foreign invaders. With autoimmune disease, you accidentally have this immune response against your own healthy tissue, like in lupus, as an example. With allergy, it's this immune response that happens to things in the environment that we would think would be benign, like food, as an example. We need food to sustain life, but how does our immune system know that food is safe to consume? And for some people, basically the immune system thinks that food is a parasite and creates this potentially life-threatening reaction that's often referred to as anaphylaxis, or it could be something like pollen, dust, pet dander that can cause a lot of irritating symptoms and increase the risk of having a whole host of other issues. And so allergy presents in many different ways, all related to how the immune system is responding to those foreign substances.
You know, because we're nerdy on this podcast, it seems to me, and I, obviously went to medical school, so spent some time learning, or just say more time than the average person learning about how your body responds to these things. And, the simple approach that I've always had is body sees something completely normal and then freaks out. So think like dog sees a delivery man and goes nuts. And you're like, the delivery man is just here to deliver, not really doing anything bad. In fact, maybe doing something good. And you are treating this like a foreign intruder. And there are a lot of different reasons why an immune system could freak out. What do we know about why our immune systems do this?
Well, it depends on the substance that we're talking about, and this is an evolving field. So one of the examples I like to give people is seasonal allergies. One of the reasons why we are seeing more people suffering from it and why you'll hear people say this is the worst year it's ever been is because of the types of exposure and how long we're being exposed to that foreign substance. So your immune system operates differently in different parts of the body. So if you inhale something or you ingest something, there's different aspects of the immune system that do that. And so with seasonal allergies, which is mainly driven by pollen grains released from trees in the spring, grass in the summer, and ragweed and other weed-related plants in the late summer and into the first frost of the fall, you are exposed to millions upon millions of these pollen grains. And what we've seen over time is the temperatures have been rising. And with rising temperatures mean that the plants start releasing pollen earlier in the year, and then they stop pollinating later in the year. So you have a longer period of pollination. The number of pollen grains have been increasing too because carbon dioxide is being released into the atmosphere through burning greenhouse gas emissions. So that's like basically plant food, part of the photosynthesis. And there's been elegant studies where they literally put trees into these special warehouses that are controlled by how much carbon dioxide they're exposed to. So when they expose those plants to higher levels of carbon dioxide, more pollen grains are being released. And we're also seeing some changes in the actual structure of the pollen grains in some cases, like with ragweed, where the immune system may latch onto that foreign substance and create a more robust and more severe allergic reaction that can create a lot of symptoms. So as much as people don't like to hear the term climate change, it is a real phenomenon when we see that we are literally dumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. The temperatures have been rising. That's creating the immune system's kind of irritation in an indirect way to lead to more people suffering from seasonal allergies.
This may be the key to getting people to care about climate change. It's like, listen, existential doom, terrible. They're like, nah. We're like, seasonal allergies? And they're like, okay, no, listen, this
no,
has
we got to take
stop.
this seriously. Yeah.
This has to end.
Yeah. I mean, there was a study that came out recently, about a year or two ago, where they looked at what is the pollen counts and what is the pollen season going to look like in the future, in our kids' lifetime. And in the year 2100, they predict that we're going to have anywhere between 30 to 90 days more pollen season than it is now, which is just really, really troublesome.
That's wild. I want to get to the broader implications of that in a minute, but I also want to talk a little bit about the biology here, because one of the things that there's some evidence to demonstrate, and certainly feels true, is that there's just more allergies happening out in the world. What do we understand about why that's happening?
Right. So there's also some genetic components that we're learning about more and more. So a lot of children develop eczema, and eczema is kind of this gateway to developing other allergic diseases. It's often called the atopic march. So once you have eczema, you're at higher risk of developing allergic rhinitis, asthma, and food allergies typically. And so what we have started to learn more and more is that the disruption in the skin barrier is kind of a gateway towards a process called sensitization, where your immune system starts creating these antibodies called immunoglobulin E, or IgE. It's a subclass of antibodies normally involved in preventing parasitic infections, but in a lot of developed countries, we don't see parasitic infections as much. So the immune system starts creating havoc in other ways by creating these antibodies to food or to latex or to pollen, right? And that's a process where you're primed to eventually become allergic after subsequent exposure. So not all allergic reactions act this way, but one of the most common ways is through this, what we call type 1 hypersensitivity reaction. And that often starts with eczema. So there may be some environmental factors and genetic predisposition where you develop this skin disease, then your skin is being exposed to these foreign substances, the immune system becomes sensitized, and then later on becomes allergic.
What do you make of this like cleanliness hypothesis, right? That fewer of us are spending time, or at least maybe not us, that you and I seem to be about similar age, that like our generation was the last generation that spent like a lot of our time outside,
Right.
getting exposed to all kinds of different things in the dirt, in the grime, and animals and all of it. And then this generation, our children, are spending a lot less time out of doors. And there's some evidence around children who grew up on farms and their risk of allergies. What do you make of the cleanliness hypothesis? Both, how do you think about that? And then what does that mean about sort of what the intervention ought to be if we want to protect our kids from these kinds of allergies?
Right. So that's a fascinating question, and one that a lot of people are trying to tackle. So the original idea is called the hygiene hypothesis. This idea that if you are too clean, so to speak, your immune system's not being challenged enough to basically prevent allergic or autoimmune diseases. But there's certain nuances to this hypothesis that don't quite make sense, because we know that there are certain types of infections, certain pathogens, microbes that actually can increase your risk of developing allergic diseases and autoimmune diseases. Classic examples are rhinovirus and RSV, which increase your risk of developing asthma if you have that early in life. We're starting to learn emerging evidence that COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes that disease, can potentially increase the risk of developing autoimmune disease. We're seeing more people with autoantibodies towards these things. So, so keeping clean is important to prevent pathogenic infections. So that part of the hypothesis is somewhat flawed. But there's a newer type of hypothesis called the old friends hypothesis, or old friends theory, where there are certain commensal organisms that are a part of our microbiome, the environment, whether it's on our skin or in our gut, right, that coexist with us in a positive way to help regulate our immune system and don't cause pathogenic disease where you get very sick. And that's the type of issue where you're outside, you're playing in the dirt, and there's a lot of organisms that can potentially be beneficial. And some of the studies we've seen is that, let's say we compare populations of kids who were born to mothers who came from C-section or a normal spontaneous vaginal delivery, and we find that those who are born by C-section, there's an association with having more allergic diseases. And that might be because they're not being born through the birth canal, they're not getting exposed to some of those commensal bacteria, therefore their gut microbiome, that's the environment in the gut, is not necessarily the same. So there are certain exposures early in life that can be important, but it's not to tell people, oh yeah, it's important to build your immune system by getting sick. That's not actually beneficial. So there's a nuance there that people need to understand, that yes, it's important for certain types of exposures, like we see associations with pets early in life can potentially reduce the risk of developing a pet allergy. Those early exposures are potentially healthy, but not to say, oh, there's chicken pox in the neighborhood, go get a pox party, or with this measles outbreak that's been occurring, let's have measles parties. Those are bad ideas.
Yeah, I really appreciate that nuance, right? So I want to sort of break down a couple of pieces that you talked about here. The reason that your exposure to the world may decrease your probability of having allergies is not because you get sick from it. It's because the normal bacteria and other exposures that you get from being a little bit dirty can actually help protect you over time. The other interesting piece here is that, part of this idea of hygiene is that we're constantly washing away these bacteria all the time, right? And that is, while I am a big fan of washing hands and staying clean, the degree to which we do it, right, when you're like shampooing your hair every day or you're washing your face every day, we had a really interesting conversation with actually a physician writer named James Hamblin, and he just decided not to shower for a while. And his note was basically that, your body's evolved a lot of ways to live in symbiosis with these microfauna that are out there in the world. And when we wash that away, we may be doing ourselves a disservice. That's one piece of it. The other interesting thing, to the point about like folks who grow up on farms and in rural areas, is that, we're focused on the farm part, and what we're not focused is on the rural part. And the rural part means that the probability of being exposed to the kinds of infectious diseases that tend to spread a lot faster in density, like in cities, that part may actually be part of what mediates this observation that folks who grew up in these contexts may have lower probability of allergies over time. And so, there's something about protecting yourself from the exposure to these illnesses that also comes with being somebody who tills the land. That is a classic confounder in the way that we think about this.
Exactly. And, we bring up a good point about bathing, because with my patients with eczema, I often tell them to not use soap every day, that you might use soap a few times a week or to really dirty areas, because you use soap, yes, to clean and stay with good hygiene, but it actually strips away some of the healthy skin barrier. So I often tell people to, yes, sit in a tub for 10 to 15 minutes to absorb that moisture, especially when it's dry out. And then if you need medication, you put it on afterwards after you pat dry, and then put on moisturizer to lock it in. A lot of people have this misconception that, oh, I shouldn't bathe at all and just put on moisturizer. Where's the water going to come from in a dry climate, right? So it kind of lends to that point where if we strip away some of that area, you end up irritating the skin more. And so we have to find a way to balance out maintaining a cleanly body, make sure that you smell right, not being exposed to certain chemicals, but at the same time, we want to balance that immune system out.
Yeah, I appreciate that advice. And, we're obviously in the thick of allergy season. A lot of folks out there struggling right now. Obviously, you're not going to give clinical advice on a podcast, but what do you think of as the general guideline for how folks should think about managing their allergies? What is, allergies that you can manage by just trying to avoid exposure versus allergies that should be managed by something over the counter versus you need to go see a doctor?
Right. So I have a few kind of tenets that I talk about with my patients and I talk about on social media and in interviews like this, which is the first thing you got to do is identify what you're actually sensitive to, because there are a lot of things in the environment that can cause problems. You may think it's pollen, but maybe it's also your animal, or it could be kind of an issue with both where your animal goes outside and brings stuff into the house, right? So you have to think about all those potential points of entry, and allergy testing, whether that's through your primary care or an allergist, can be helpful in identifying that. So once you have that, you can find ways to reduce exposure. Since there is this idea of a symptom threshold where your immune system can tolerate a certain amount, and that varies from person to person. But if you have multiple exposures at the same time, then it's almost as if like your cup of the immune system runneth over and creates symptoms. So if you can at least take away one of those exposures, it might actually help without even having to take medication at all for some situations. So again, identify exposures, reduce, your exposure to it, the symptom triggers, that is. And then the medications that are over the counter, there are basically a few categories of them. There's the antihistamines, which most of them are taken by mouth, but also there's a nasal spray now that's an antihistamine. There are steroids that are taken through nasal sprays. There's decongestants. And then there's some really old medications not always available. They're called mast cell stabilizers or cromolyn sodiums, a nasal spray that's also available as well. Not as effective. And then what I really like for anybody, if they can tolerate it, is rinsing their nose with saline water. Because, I always tell people, you brush your teeth twice a day. Why aren't you cleaning your nose? Your nose is disgusting if you actually think about it. It's full of mucus, irritants, allergens, and we let that sit there. And oftentimes, yes, we blow our nose, but that doesn't always get everything out, because especially when it's dry out, it's hard because the mucus just tends to crust over and kind of keep everything in. You've got sinus pockets in your skulls that also produce fluid. And if you are getting inflammation, that's going to sit there. So you got to get that flushed out regularly to help prevent some of these symptoms from happening. And so if you do that at least at night before you go to bed, you will find a huge difference, even without having to take medication. But anytime anybody uses it, do not use plain tap water. There's a theoretical risk of getting very sick with it. There's something called Naegleria fowleri, which is often referred to as the brain-eating amoeba. So we want to avoid that, even though it's very rare, but you don't want to take that chance. And so the medications, I just want to make a couple notes about it, is that antihistamines don't treat all the symptoms of allergies. They treat mainly itching, sneezing, runny nose. The steroids are more effective, but they don't work quite as quickly and have more potential side effects that people worry about. We always are, concerned about steroids. So I want to make sure that people know that distinction. And reasons to go to see your physician is you try the over-the-counter medications, it's not working. You're having significant impacts in your quality of life. So you're not sleeping well, you're not concentrating well, you're not able to perform at work or school. You're getting sick, right? If you get a sinus infection, that's not normal, right? We want to try to prevent those from happening. So if you're getting at least one sinus infection a year, I think it's a good idea to see an allergist to try to help reduce the chances of that happening.
Yeah, that's really helpful. The nasal rinsing of the nose is new recommendation for me, and I really appreciate it. Thankfully, I'm not somebody who has bad seasonal allergies, but I definitely have family members who do, and I'm gonna make sure they listen to this, because that's really valuable.
Every episode of Trade-Offs is grounded in rigorous research.
I don't think that the findings of this paper indicate that there are major clinical risks to patients.
Thoughtful conversations.
I also was thinking that a lot of the anger, while real, is somewhat misplaced.
And insights into what the latest in health policy means for you.
And every member of Congress should be asking questions on both sides of the aisle about, hey, we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars. What are we getting for it?
We tell stories that cut through the noise, uncovering the data and personal stories that help you understand the stakes and the potential solutions to healthcare's toughest choices. Subscribe to Trade-Offs wherever you get your podcasts.
Another really big one when it comes to allergies that we've been thinking a lot about, especially if you've got children of a young age, is peanut allergies. And we've been learning a lot over time. Recommendations have changed quite a bit. What do you recommend when it comes to introducing peanuts to infants? And why and how has the advice changed over time?
Right. So for a long time, pediatricians recommended that we delayed introduction of peanuts until about 3, because there was concern that the immune system was not ready to handle some of these more highly allergenic type foods like peanut. And there was a really elegant study called the LEAP study, Learning Early About Peanut study, that was published. I can't believe it's been 10 years now. It's been that long, where they compared 2 groups of children that either were told, okay, you've got to start, the parents were told you got to feed your babies before they turn a year old, or delay it till they're 5. And we're going to follow over time what happens. And they found that it was roughly an 80% risk reduction in developing peanut allergy if you're introduced early. Not 100%, it's not foolproof. So I always tell people that we're still seeing a lot of food allergy diagnoses, even though people are updating these guidelines and telling people that around 4 to 6 months old, most infants should be introduced to peanut, as an example. And we're trying to encourage more earlier introductions of these highly allergenic foods like egg, peanut, tree nuts, wheat, soy, fish, shellfish, and now sesame. So the earlier the exposure may be better, but it's still happening. I'm still diagnosing food allergy in my clinic almost every single day. And so there's other things that are going on that we have to look into, whether it's genetics, which is a part of it, and some type of environmental factor. We kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier, with like C-sections as an example. Early antibiotic use is associated, although we need antibiotics to save lives. So don't take this and say that we should never give antibiotics. They're still really important, right? Antacids, I think, could be a potential target to look into. And there's been some studies showing associations because a lot of babies with reflux are given that. There may be ways that we're processing foods that could be problematic. And so there's a lot that has to be looked into. And as we mentioned earlier, there's this idea of confounding factors. There's multiple things happening at the same time. And to control for all of that can be difficult. So to find the one reason why this is happening is probably not possible. It's a multitude of reasons. So what is a good idea, especially if you have a history of eczema, which increases the risk of developing food allergies, you need to talk with your pediatrician about when is the right time to do this. So if you have a child with moderate to severe eczema, it is now recommended that if they haven't started peanuts, that they should consider getting tested for ahead of time to see what is the risk of them reacting to peanut. But I don't recommend everybody getting testing, especially panel testing early in life, because there is a risk of what we call false positive testing. You could have a test saying you have an allergy, but you really don't. And that's a highly nuanced conversation. I spend hours of my time each week going over with families the risks and benefits of testing because, and this is true with any aspect of medical care, testing is not always 100% accurate and comes with risks. And you have to understand the accuracy of the test, the risk of doing the test versus not doing the test, to see if it's going to improve the chances of getting the right diagnosis and then following up appropriately. And with food allergy testing, I've seen so many families coming in where they were improperly diagnosed with food allergies. And that may have been because they were over-tested. And so we have to be very careful early in life when the immune system is still developing to make sure that we get accurate diagnoses and not leave families with more problems than what they originally started with.
Yeah, that's really helpful advice. And I think to your broader point, right, there is sort of a meta education that has to happen when it comes to how to think about evidence-based decision-making in health. And one of the things I really appreciate about you is that you've used your platform. You built quite a platform talking about allergies, which are sort of a gateway into this broader conversation about how to think about any intervention. Tests are never perfect. Medicine is never perfect. There are always side effects. Now, the question is always, do the side effects of the intervention outweigh the side effects of the disease you're trying to either prevent or treat?
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. And oftentimes, the answer is absolutely yes, right? Like, so chemotherapy is poison. Like literally, if you just gave somebody chemotherapy, you would kill them. However, if there is a part of your body that is growing uncontrollably and it could kill you, then you take some poison to kill that part of your body that's actively growing, that ideally targets as much of it, but also kills other parts of your body, which is why people on chemo lose their hair, right? In the hopes that you save the person. Now, if you literally just said, well, chemo's poison, so we should never give it to anybody, what you are forgetting is that cancer is deadly, right? And we do this, we forget this kind of reasoning all the time. And unfortunately, it's been weaponized by some of the worst actors who've also gotten really, really large health and healthcare platforms nowadays. And you've made the decision to be pretty open about your critiques and frustrations with the current HHS secretary and others. How are you thinking about that? And what motivated you? And how have you found the reception with your audience?
Well, there's a few stories to this, actually. I want to kind of go back to when I was a child, because I think this is interesting and unique to me. So I grew up, my dad's a general pediatrician, and he had a private practice, and he was an ABC News contributor for a while in the 90s and early 2000s. And he was interviewed once about the Andrew Wakefield story and how, there was this paper published in the Lancet trying to link vaccines with autism. And I've never forgotten that interview that my dad did, because then it was followed up with statements by RFK Jr., actually. Mm-hmm. And I posted that video recently. I was able to find it, unearth it, because it's been, over 20 years ago now. So it gives me kind of chills thinking that I'm doing the same thing now, trying to speak out against these blatant pieces of mis and disinformation that's been happening. But really was the impetus to start doing it recently was, if you recall, the beginning of the year, when the new administration came in, they decided to basically blacklist all of the Health and Human Services communications that were coming out, that if there was a press release, it had to go through an administrator. And because I do a lot of work with food allergies, my patients and the broader food allergy community rely on food recalls to know if a product has an undeclared allergen in it. And those communications stopped. I was getting those emails. I was subscribed to them myself prior to this happening and saw that all those emails stopped. And I was like, wait a minute, the public's not going to know about these things because unless they're actively seeing it on social media or if they're subscribing to it, they're not going to know right away because a lot of times these recalls don't go out immediately. It gets delayed. So I said, okay, let me go see what the FDA is doing on their website. They were still publishing them there, but they weren't actually communicating it directly to the public. And a lot of the news stories that were coming out were old stories. So I decided to take it upon myself to send these updates in my Substack to the broader community. And I grew a following very quickly because a lot of people were nervous about this communication blockade that was happening. And this is happening while the bird flu, the emerging bird flu issue with H5N1 was happening. Measles is happening. And because I am a pediatrician by training and I'm board certified, I maintain that certification. I see a lot of kids. I also see adults now in my allergy training. I felt the need to help the broader community out with these various pediatric issues, public health issues, infectious disease, and say, okay, this is what's going on, folks, because we're not getting communication from the CDC like we normally do. There's a fake website out here. There's all these cuts happening, and these directly impact my patients, my community, and the broader world. And so I took it upon myself to start to raise awareness towards these issues. And whenever I saw that our public health officials were saying incorrect statements about things like vitamin A being an effective treatment for measles or budesonide or clarithromycin, all these different issues, I wanted to help clarify that from a point of expertise that I see patients on a regular basis, but we're roughly the same age. Have you ever seen a case of measles yourself? I mean, I've never seen a case of measles. My dad did because he trained in the 70s and 80s. It was still around. And in my town, he was the only physician that knew anything about measles when there was like a very small outbreak. But it was officially eliminated in 2000, and now we're on the verge of losing that status because it may end up becoming endemic from all of the misinformation that has culminated over the last 5 years from the COVID-19 pandemic. Our vaccination rates have declined over time. And while I understand people's concerns about the safety and efficacy of vaccines, a lot of it has been blown out of proportion to what it actually is. So I try to, in my content, talk about the nuances of medicine that's often lost in the communications that happen on the news and on social media.
I really appreciate you doing that and sharing that anecdote about your father. It gives you chills, right? Because it's like, we're still doing this. And the hard part is, from that space where emotion meets logic, it's a lot easier to scare somebody about something and tell them they shouldn't do it than it is to reassure them that they should, even if the preponderance of the evidence is about what they should do. And the fact that we're now headed back into a period where diseases that we had thought we had addressed are starting to reemerge, that's a really scary thing. And I'll tell you that I think a lot of folks in our line of work, whether in medicine or public health, don't feel well prepared to engage the public and have these conversations. What have you learned in your advocacy and in your content creation that you feel like others in this space, or even folks who aren't in this work but like are having conversations with loved ones?
Yeah.
What is it that you learned about how best to communicate in this moment?
Well, I go back to that story I was telling you about my dad because I vividly remember this news bit, because when my dad talked about logic, they then followed up with a mother whose child had autism. And she basically said that, I don't know anything about double-blind placebo-controlled studies, but I just know that my child was injured by vaccines and that's what caused autism. And so I go back to this emotional piece that is driven by this, the correlation does not meet causation issue, right? And we can talk about all the evidence and all the studies, but sometimes what we need to do is come from a place of empathy, of kindness, respect, and understanding, a place of patience where it's not going to be fixed overnight. This problem has been emerging for decades now. It's really nothing new. And it can be rather frustrating because it directly impacts people who are trying to do the right thing. And so it's very easy when you see online people talking about this that they get very angry, You see the comment section flying with a lot of people being upset. But I urge people to have a level head when you have conversations and not be afraid to come back to it and to really take your time and really be genuinely interested in why they think certain things are too dangerous to be done. Like vaccines or any potential, recommendation for a public health intervention. It's not just that. We had this whole debate about masking, which became very political and very emotionally driven rather than looking at the science. And, it's come to the point where when people are masking for themselves, and it can still be beneficial, I still do in many situations, there are people who are looking at it with disdain. And it's happened on both ends of the spectrum, where people who are wearing the mask are upset that people aren't. People who aren't are upset that people are. And it's like we all are on the same earth. We all are going to, and this is very morbid, I know, but we're all going to pass away someday. And we just got to get through life a little bit easier and come to a better understanding. So coming from a place of patience, understand where people are coming from, trying to slowly untangle those issues takes time, patience, and effort. But I think it's worth it, because I have seen results directly from my platform where people would say, wow, I'm concerned about this measles outbreak and I wasn't sure about my vaccination status. So I ended up checking and my titers didn't show anything. I'm not actually immune to measles, so I got a booster. And I think that really helped. And raising awareness to these issues. And when it comes to other things that I talk about, there's risks with medications. Montelukast, known as Singular, is a commonly prescribed allergy and asthma medication that carries the risk of mood disorders, anxiety, depression, thoughts of self-harm. And it's not always disclosed in a conversation with the physician, because you've only got 10 minutes with the patient sometimes, or even less when it's very busy. And it gets lost in translation sometimes. So being able to help raise awareness towards these issues can really help people advocate for themselves better.
That is a great place, I think, to end it. Our guest today is Dr. Zachary Rubin. He's a double board certified pediatrician specializing in allergy treatment and immunology. We really appreciate you taking the time. Dr. Rubin, where can folks find you on the interwebs?
Yeah, so my username is RUBIN_allergy, Rubin_allergy, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. I'm basically everywhere, Substack. And I'm really excited that next month, in May, we're going to have pre-orders starting for my book called All About Allergies that will go over all of these issues we talked about in greater detail when it comes to allergic diseases.
Well, we'll look forward to it, and we appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much.
That's it for today. You can find more content on our website, incisionmedia.co. Check out our shop at store.americadissected.com for our new America Dissected merch, including logo shirts, hoodies, and mugs. And don't miss out on our Make America Scientific Again dad caps. If you have guest recommendations for the show, send us an email at info@incisionmedia.co. You can follow or subscribe to America Dissected on your favorite podcast platform and on YouTube at America Dissected. You can follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Abdul no dash. And make sure you subscribe to Katelyn's incredible newsletter, Your Local Epidemiologist, which breaks down scientific evidence for over 300,000 readers. Search for Your Local Epidemiologist on Substack. Links to all our sponsors are available in the show notes. I really do hope you'll check them out and show them some love. They make the show possible every single week. Finally, on your way out, don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube, drop us a like or a comment. Word of mouth still goes a long way too. So if you know somebody who might like to keep up with everything that's happening in the world of health, please let them know. America Dissected is a product of Incision Media. Our co-host is Dr. Katelyn Jetelina. Our producer is Andy Gardner-Bernstein. Video and audio editing by Nadine Malkonian. Our theme song is by Taka Suzawa and Alex Uguera. Sales and marketing by Joel Fowler and Nick Freeman at Big Little Media. Our executive producers are Tara Knight and me, Dr. Abdul your host. Thanks for listening. This show is for general information and entertainment purposes only. It's not intended to provide specific healthcare or medical advice and should not be construed as providing healthcare or medical advice. Please consult your own physician with any questions related to your own health.